Okay, in this video I'm going to show you how to change the brakes on a Honda Pilot from 2016 to 2022. This is also good for any Odyssey, Ridgeline, or Passport. The vehicle I'm going to be changing the brakes on in this video is going to be my 2016 Honda Pilot. It has 143,000 miles on it, and I've never changed the rear brakes yet. So I'm really interested to see how much is left on these pads. Alright, so the first thing I got to do is take the tire off. So I got the key to the lug nut right there. Now you're going to use that key to loosen up that one special lug nut so nobody steals your tire, so they say. And then loosen up all the rest of the lug nuts. That's Brian right there loosening up the tire for me while I'm taking video. Okay, here's what you're going to need next. You need a jack and 2 jack stands. This is a good time for me to tell you that any tools that are going to be in this video, I'm going to put a link to them in the description. So if you need them, you can just click on the link and find a place to purchase them. Okay, now you're going to roll your jack underneath the rear of the car, and there's a special spot on the frame where you put the jack so you can jack up the car nice and high like Brian's doing right there. High enough so that the wheels are off the ground and the jack stands can go on their spots on the frame right in front of the tires where the car can be lowered down onto them, no problem. Then you're going to take the tire off, and in this video we're only going to show you the brakes being changed on one tire, but obviously you're going to need to do both. Now take a look here. There's the rotor. Here's the caliper, all rusty looking because it's old. You're going to have to take these bolts out. They're 12 millimeters. Get your ratchet out, start loosening those up. This will help you take off the caliper here. So Brian's loosening those bolts up. We're going to speed up the recording here. And then as soon as he gets those bolts out, he's going to pull that caliper off so that he can get to the brake pads. Now he's trying to pull the caliper off here, and you're probably going to run into this same issue. It's on there pretty tight and maybe a little rusty, so you're going to have to do a little wiggling to get it off. So he grabbed a screwdriver to wiggle it off of there. Just kind of jam it into some of the spots where you can loosen it up, and he's just moving around with his hand. And I mean, eventually it's just going to come out, but you just got to work it, and eventually it'll come off. Now when you take that caliper off, it's connected still, so you have to put it somewhere so it's not going to be in the way. So we decided to put a, what is that, a bungee cord? Yeah, there we go, bungee cord up there, and string it up so that it's out of the way. But we realized when we did this second tire that there's a much better place to put it. Take a look at this. There's like a little shelf right there. So just put it there. You don't need to do that bungee cord business. All right, back to the one we were doing originally. There's the brake pads. Now you're gonna have to take out this brake assembly, and these are 17 millimeters. So you gotta get your ratchet out, and you're gonna loosen up those 17 millimeter bolts. And you're probably gonna run into this problem too. Pushing and hitting, and you can't loosen those bolts up. So what you gotta do is get yourself one of these breaker bars. They are a dream. It's nice and long, get you a lot of torque, and it allows you to loosen up those bolts without banging and hitting the ratchet. And once you loosen up the bolts just a little bit, back to the ratchet, and you can just go ahead and loosen up all those bolts, and then you can take them out with your hand, and then you're good to go. So I highly recommend getting yourself a breaker bar. Okay, once you take out the bolts, then the brake assembly just slides right off. Now is a good opportunity for you to look at those brake pads and see what's left on them. Not bad for 143,000 miles if you ask me. Now in this next step, you have to get this screw out of the rotor, and you don't want to strip it. But a lot of the times you got a screwdriver and you're trying to loosen that up and you just can't do it. So to prevent yourself from stripping it, I highly recommend getting this tool. It's an impact driver, a screwdriver where you basically put it in, you get yourself a hammer, and you give it a good whack. And then when you hit it, it pushes into the screw and turns at the same time, and loosens the screw up without you stripping it. And then it's super easy to pull out after that. Make sure you don't use a power drill. Okay, so now you gotta pull that rotor off. And sometimes it doesn't want to come off because it's stuck from all those 143,000 miles you've been driving. So get your hammer out again and give it a little whack. It'll loosen it up. Couple smackaroos, and now you can just wiggle it and pull it right off. Look at that. Okay, now these are the rotors I purchased. I got them from AutoZone, and they're the Duralast Gold, and they have a coating called the Z-Clad coating on them. So basically, when you drive with it, the black coating comes off in like the first mile or two. So you don't have to clean the rotors or anything like that before you put them on. But if you don't get these kind of rotors, you have to clean them with this brake cleaner. You have to spray them like this and then wipe them down. No big deal. I did that for my front rotors when I replaced them. Now, since you're doing the back rotors, they have this little rubber piece here that covers an access to the emergency brake. So you gotta make sure you pop that out and then put it into the new rotor so that it protects that area of the emergency brake. So this is what it looks like. It tends kind of a little persnickety a little bit there, but just work it, it'll eventually go in. All right, now there's the hole for that screw that we were talking about earlier that you don't want to strip. You want to make sure that hole on the rotor is lined up where that screw is going to go, because you want to put that screw back in. So you slide the rotor on, and then you just put the screw right back in. I want to take a moment here to say how cool these black rotors look. But I'm telling you, after I drove them for about 2 miles, they were silver again. They didn't look black like that anymore. Okay, so now you got to put the new pads in where the old pads were. So you got to pop the old pads out. And once again, let's take a look at how thick these pads were. There's some pad left there, just a little bit. Okay, now Brian decided to go ahead and take this wire brush and kind of work a little bit of where the pads are going to go, because it looked a little rusty and it might have been harder to put the new pads in because it's, 143,000 miles. So that's the difference right there. He's got one side finished with the wire brush and one side he didn't. So we just wanted to show you what the difference looked like, the two. Okay, here are the brake pads. They come with all these goodies. These are the clips you're going to put on to the brake assembly, and they give you some of the brake lube you're going to use in a little bit. Here are all those clips that I was talking about that are going to go on the brake assembly. Now, on the back side of the brake pad, there's a little clip spot right there where you're going to want to put the indicator. This is the little metal indicator that will start squeaking if your brake pads are getting too low. The back side here is where you're going to put some of that lube. You can either use this lube, the Molly brake lube that they give you, or I'm going with this stuff, Disc Brake Quiet. I bought this a while ago and I love it. I learned a while ago also that a little bit goes a long way. So you just put a tiny bit on, and then with your finger you spread it around, and that's more than enough. Don't go crazy and put a whole bunch of lube on there, because then it's just hard to handle. Okay, so there we go. Spreading it around. Looking good. You're going to want to do that to both brake pads. Okay, once you have all that finished, then you're going to take the clips, the brand new ones you got, and put them on the brake assembly. And that's what the pads are going to slide into. So you're going to need to take some lube and put it in the little slot that I show you here with the arrow. I use the disc brake quiet again right there, or you can use the lube that they give you with the brake pads. Either one's fine. And that way you can slide the brake pads right into those slots. Then you're going to take your little clip here, squeeze it together a little bit so it doesn't pull the brake pads apart. So it's just the right size, and it goes in the little holes that are on the brake pads. One where Brian's putting it there, and then I gave him the other one, and it's going to go on the other side, just like so. Now, before you put the brake pads back on, you have to go back to the piston that's on the caliper that you put up on that little shelf. I highly recommend, again, to get this tool that I'm showing you here. It's called a caliper piston compressor, because it pushes the piston back in on the caliper before you reinstall the caliper onto the brake pads. If you don't, you gotta do this. You gotta get a C-clamp and use the old brake pad to slowly clamp the piston and push it back in. It's just a lot easier to get that tool. Okay, well, once you get the piston pushed in on the caliper, then you can go ahead and slide the brake assembly back on, put the bolts back in. Basically, you're just going backwards of how you took it apart before. And then you're going to tighten the bolts. Once again, these are the 17 millimeters. Make sure that you make these bolts nice and snug. If you want to use that breaker bar again to make them a little bit tighter, go right ahead. Okay, once you get that on, then you're going to take the caliper and slide it over the brake pads, just the opposite of what you did when you took it off. Line up the bolts and slide them in and tighten them up. These are the 12 millimeter bolts that hold the calipers on. It can kind of be a little tricky trying to get it so the bolts line up, but you just need to maneuver it around a little bit and then tighten it back up. Okay, now it's time to put the wheel back on. So we roll it over, put it back on, and start putting those lug nuts on. Don't forget to put the lug nuts on in a star fashion, so you don't do it in a circle. You go in the same way you would draw a star, and use your special key to get that special lug nut to tighten up. And after you tighten up all the lug nuts, then you're gonna pump up the car again so you can get the jack stands out, and then you can lower the car back down. And once the car is lowered down, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and tighten up those lug nuts as far as you can go. We're using the breaker bar there to make it nice and snug. And of course, after everything's all said and done, pump the brakes. That way it'll get the piston to grab onto those brake pads and you'll be good to go. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit that thumbs up. I'd really appreciate it. And have a great day.